Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Adult Chair on rashpixel.fm. I'm Pete Wright, and right over there is Michelle Chalfant.
Hi, Pete Wright.
Are you vaping right now?
I'm not vaping.
And did you learn it from your kids? That's what I want to know.
No, you're going to hear about that in a minute, but no.
Excellent.
I actually am learning about it from my kids, but no, they didn't teach me how to do it.
All right, excellent. Well, that's a good start. We are going to be talking a lot about kids and substances today, and we have a fantastic guest to help us do that. Before we do, head over to theadultchair.com to learn more about us and this show. You can subscribe to the show for free by signing up for our mailing list, or find us anywhere the finer podcasts are served with a quick search for the Adult Chair. You can join the conversation on Facebook or Twitter. We would love to hear from you, especially in that private Facebook group. But this week, we would really love to see you register for the intensive. Michelle, it's coming right up. 3-day Nashville intensive. It's next week, Michelle.
I know. I can't even believe it. We have that next week, and then I'll be in Charlotte mid-October for 2 days doing the Adult Chair intensive, which is great, being that we have a very special guest today talking about teenagers and raising teens and all the lovely issues that come along with raising teens. One of the struggles I find that we have as parents is that we're not great maybe at setting boundaries, and we get triggered by our kids. And when we live in our adult chair, we are equipped and we have tools that help us to stay present with ourselves so we can be better parents for our kids. So this is absolutely a class that if you're wanting just to be a healthier version of yourself, this is what this class is all about. So whether you're dealing with kids or teenagers, or you just want to learn how to love yourself or set boundaries or live in the moment, this is what we do. We do lots of meditation and just all kinds of great stuff in this class. So very excited about it.
That is perfect. So bring those issues to this class. There are still a couple of seats available. It's an intentionally small group. This is going to be a really great, very intimate workshop experience, and can't wait to see you all at the Scarrett Bennett Center in Nashville next weekend.
Yes.
Get on there, michellechalfant.com. You can register right there on the workshops page. It's right. You can't miss it. It's right on the homepage. It's the first thing you click. It's right there at the very top. And there you go. Thank you, everybody. And now, here we go. Dr. James Wellborn is back. Jim is a clinical psychologist who specializes in individual, family, and group psychotherapy with children and adolescents, addressing a range of challenges faced by families and teens during this period of development. He's served as a consultant in schools, developing programs to support at-risk youth. He's a strong advocate on radio, TV, and print, helping parents support their child's healthy development. He is the author of Raising Teens in the 21st Century, a practical guide to effective parenting that is a reference for parents to address a whole host of teenage issues. You may remember him, though, from his starring role in episode 35 of this very podcast. He's back today to talk to us about the challenges.
Recurring role.
The challenges teens face around substance abuse as they learn to live in their own adult chair. Jim, welcome back.
Thanks. It's good to be here. I'm going to be the plucky comic relief, I think, in this episode.
Oh, we'll take it.
We will take it.
Okay, so Michelle, you got to set us up. Why are we talking about this? What are your kids teaching you, and what can Jim do to help?
Well, I want to start out by saying one of my missions with this whole podcast is to teach people how to live in their adult chair. What I mean by this, for those of you that do not know, is that when we are in our adult chair, we are living from the healthiest version of ourselves. So we're conscious, we're living in the moment. We learn how to set boundaries here. We're really healthy. We're not just healthy, though, for ourselves. We're healthy for or in relationships with others. And today we're going to talk about how do we stay in that healthy perspective or in our adult chair with our kids, especially our teenagers, when they are going through these that could be difficult years, where they're experimenting with things like we've talked about the vaping, the smoking, the getting high, there's drinking happening. So this is why I wanted to have Jim come back on, because he is an expert in our area. And again, I'm sure, Jim, all over not just in our area, but everyone knows about you because you're an expert of raising teens in the 21st century, which I love. So in order for us to maintain ourselves in our adult chair, we need some, higher understandings of how do we do this? How do we parent our teens when they're getting involved and experimenting with all these things?
That's for sure. The strategizing becomes crucial because teenagers Teenagers are their natural developmental task is to be pushing around at boundaries. And so it does get difficult to kind of stay consistently sane as a parent, for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, these are things that I, at first, and I was not a naive person thinking this is just in Nashville, Tennessee area, because I have friends all over the United States, actually all over the world. And specifically my friends in the United States, we're all dealing with the same kind of thing. Parents are finding these vapes starting as early as middle school, even. I found my son had one. I thought it was a spark plug to a car. I had no idea what it was. I'm like, what is this thing? Absolutely. My husband was yelling at my son, and I'm like, why are you yelling at him? Doesn't that go to the car? I mean, I swear to God.
Did you hold it?
Yeah.
Did you hold it in your hand and shake it at him and say, what is this? What is this that I found?
Oh my God. And I have the funniest story about the vape. So a friend of mine found this thing, which she didn't know was a vape in the car. And I guess I've never seen one used, but you put, Jim, you'll know this, but some sort of liquid or juice or something in it. And unfortunately with these kids, they market these juices that you put or liquids that you put in this vape to smoke. They're all marketed towards kids. They have bubblegum and blueberry and coconut and all these fun little flavors. And my friend found one in her car, in her son's car. And she's like, is this some kind of sex juice? What is this stuff? I don't know what this pineapple something is. And I'm like, it's vape juice. So we did not have vaping, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. This is new. So please enlighten us. Please enlighten us. Because these kids are using the vapes now. So,
right. I suspect she was somewhat relieved to find that it wasn't pineapple sex oil. And so that's she was dead serious.
Might have said,
she might have just handed it back to him and said, here, fine, take it.
Well, and the funniest part is that we said, get rid of this thing, go return it, whatever. Well, he ended up selling it to someone else in high school who sold it to someone else who sold it to her son. And she's telling me about the vape. And I'm like, was it red? And she's like, yes, it was red. I'm like, that was my son's.
You made your own child into a dealer.
Now I have a vaping dealer son. So anyway, it seems like when I was younger, many years ago, we smoked cigarettes. Like that was cool. So it seems like I don't hear kids smoking cigarettes, and I'm sure they do, but it seems like vaping has now become the new cigarette for kids. Is that true?
Yeah. Well, the cigarette smoking has decreased significantly across the years. And the research about this, one of the Centers for Disease Control, like in 2015 or 2016, had the instances of teenagers smoking cigarettes went from, in 2011, from 15% down to 9% in 2015. So cigarette smoking's decreased, but here's the kicker. Vaping in 12th graders and seniors went from 2011 at 4% to 2015 to 17%. And so more kids are smoking or vaping than they were smoking. And so it's the substitute now for what cigarettes were and were used for, and how kids in this instance inhaled nicotine. Although another piece of this that's gotten tricky, which is reflected in you talking about your the different flavors of the juice that goes into the e-cigarettes or the vapes, is that the majority of teenagers use the vapes, the e-cigarettes, to actually for the flavor of the juice, that they purchase the juice without nicotine in it. Now, that's the fact that they're smoking it for that doesn't mean that many of them aren't still purchasing the nicotine flavored. But the thing about these vapes is that you can buy the juice that has different both flavors, but also more and less nicotine or none. And so there's a whole range of different kinds of juices to put in the cigarettes or the vape pens or whatever. And they're the upfront cost is a little bit pricey. It's like $100, $200. Yeah. And so you've also got kids who are somehow pooling their money together, that can be a significant chunk for many teenagers, and so they're making a concerted effort to put their money together to get these things.
Yes, I do know about that. Unfortunately, are they getting okay? And here's the punishment that I gave my son. He was grounded, of course, for I don't remember how many weeks, but he said, "Can I ever get off grounding?" And I said, "Here's what you're going to do." I think it was after 2 or 3 weeks, and I said, "I want you to write," because he kept saying, "What is this a big deal, Mom? It's not it doesn't have nicotine in it." He said, "It's not a big deal. All the kids do it." And of course, I hear that all the time. Everybody's doing it. It's not a big deal. Right. And I said, "Okay, here's what you need to do." Yeah, I said, "I want you to write a research paper on the pros and cons of vaping." And I knew there would be no pros, but I said, "And I want 5 sources." Okay. So he came back and he did a PowerPoint presentation. He put it up on the TV. And what's the thing that was most disturbing to me are the chemicals in this. I mean, I'd rather have him smoke a cigarette than smoke this crap.
Yes.
Formaldehyde. I mean, he went down the list of what it actually is or what actually is in it, even if there is no nicotine in it. It's disgusting right. and dangerous and bad for you. So I was hoping that would sway him to never do it again. But but do they get like a high off of it? I mean, what is the big deal with vaping? Why are kids so drawn to it?
Well, if there's no nicotine in there, it's more that it's just really cool looking. I mean, if you've seen it or when you've seen it, the cloud of vapor smoke is really just luxurious and wicked and really cool. So it's this, especially with the prominence of Game of Thrones, it's dragon smoke like almost. It's just really cool. It's the same non-addictive aspects of why kids and people have ended up smoking cigarettes for a long, long time. The coolness of it and the kind of on the edge of being bad aspect of it is naturally appealing to teenagers. So
yeah. So what do we do when we find something like this with our kids? I mean, should we be worried? We don't have long-term studies of what this is doing to them, correct?
We don't, because we didn't grow up with it. Like, that's one of the things that I feel like I can't relate to. So how do you maintain a strong relationship with your teen when you are confronting these kinds of things? Well,
sometimes the nature of what you have to do with your teenagers, you have to risk a strain on the relationship because right. they need to have things be brought down and have you shut down stuff and that kind of thing. So if addressing vaping brings the nature of your relationship with your teen to the brink, then some other stuff was already going on too. This really is inside that kind of normative, what you would expect kind of stuff that's worrisome that your teen does, but it's not like outside of the norm. It's not a sign that something's going terribly off the rails here. So it's like any of the other things that there's experimentation with about during adolescence. And so there's some ways in which you think about it like that. And so freaking out about it, this would not be the thing to freak out about. You catch your kid with the fix for shooting up heroin, there needs to be lots of freaking out about that. You find an e-cigarette or vaping equipment, then that's like, okay, what's going on? And what Michelle was saying is, in terms of consequences, there's kind of a range of things that I tend to think about consequences for teenagers. The recommendations, at least, that I make for parents about consequences and punishment and suffering that you impose on your kid.
Okay, everybody, I'm sorry about that. We have a little bit of an audio problem, and so we have switched Jim over to his cell phone, and so that's why you've heard a change in his voice. But the words are still as powerful as ever. Okay, Jim.
Yeah, so increase the pressure on me now is that I was already trying to just say something, and now it has to be especially insightful and helpful. Okay,
exactly right. I've raised the bar.
Yes, I appreciate that. And so Michelle was talking about what I was struck by when she was describing the misery and suffering that she imposed on her son when she discovered that he was vaping. by having him write the report and actually also present it is right in line with the kind of thing that I'm likely to recommend and that I think works really well from a parenting perspective, especially in a category like this, which is within that range of kind of regular things that teenagers can do and experiment with that rightfully get parents upset, but not have them think something's going terribly off the rails. And so what the research paper does, where you require them to write a formal paper that's got a set number of pages and a number of references and all that kind of stuff, is a really useful thing to do, because it forces the kid to have to investigate and do the research and get the information. But they also don't like it because it's actually, for them, a meaningless exercise, since they're not going to get a grade for it. And so it has the kind of combination of having them suffer but have some potential benefit for it. And especially having them present it. Michelle at her son sounds like, or maybe he just spontaneously both did the research and did the PowerPoint. I tend to recommend different kinds of things. And so you could have your kid do a research paper. You could have them do a PowerPoint. I actually have thought before about having the kid do a rap song. It doesn't match artistic
fun.
Expression.
I like that.
It doesn't have the suffering doesn't have to be inherently negative, but it does have to be complete and thorough and all that kind of business. And so the idea of researching is an important thing. There's the idea of there's a range of stuff that you can also consider. The first thing, I guess, that always comes into play about this situation like this with the vape is that you confiscate all the vaping stuff. And that actually is quite a punishment itself, because, as I was mentioning earlier, those things are $100, $200 for the setup. Mm-hmm. And then to buy the juices that go with them, it's an ongoing expense. And so you confiscate that stuff and either throw it away, or if you, depending on your disposition and frankly some of the qualities of your kids, you may have them like break it with a hammer in the driveway to especially make the point that it's wasted money. But the point of getting that together and collecting it and then disposing of it is the first level of punishment. And then there's a whole range of things that have to do within what I call the educate kind of consequence. And the research paper is one of those. There's also lecturing the kids, which is one of my favorite ones to recommend, because what that means is that you will sit and just talk and talk and talk and talk to them for at least 20 or 30 minutes. And I'm going to suggest you do that like multiple times, like once a week for 4 weeks after you discover it. And so just gathering information yourself, talking about your concerns, crying some about the disappointment, any of the things you can kind of pressure your kid into appreciating that this is serious, having them suffer some by having to sit and having you drone on and on and on. So the suffering comes from that. And actually, the more boring you are, the better when it comes to the lecture as the punishment.
So I love what you're saying about the vaping. And what I'm wondering is, what's coming to my mind are all my clients and even myself saying, okay, but now vaping's one thing. What about if you find your kid, he's been drinking or she's been drinking or they were getting high or there's pills or something like that? Would you say that the punishment is the same? Number one, that's my first question. And number two, I have a lot of parents that have said this to me, that they don't know what to do because they did it also in high school. They're like, well, I was drinking too in high school. Yeah. My kid isn't drinking as much as I was drinking. So is it okay that they drink? And I'm like, let me get Jim on the show. Let's get your opinion on that. Because most of us did do some drinking or something. Most of us, not everybody, in high school. So yes, I did, but I don't think it's okay that my kid is doing it. And I don't know if that's the right stance or not. So what's your opinion?
Well, the point about raising kids is not if you were able to do stuff that was high risk or even really dangerous and destructive for yourself, that's not the criteria you use about, since I did it, I guess I can't enforce that with my kid. The nature of parenting is thinking about the kid, not about whether it's inconsistent with what you did or were doing as a teenager when you were a kid. That's so the idea. The first kind of thing that is worth saying something about, I think, is that part which you were talking about, that drinking as a teenager and smoking weed as a teenager is well within the normative range of experimental behavior. consistent use of those things is not. Still, it's not normative behavior. Experimental use, occasional use is. Constant, regular, consistent use is not. And so even if you were doing that consistently as a teenager and you made it out fine, you beat the odds.
Right.
And so the parenting thing about almost everything we do is an odds playing game. We can't do anything to make sure that our kid is going to turn out okay. We do everything we can to try and ensure that they're likely to turn out okay. And so we have to play the odds. And it's much more risky if you are accepting of your kid using alcohol and marijuana. And I'll tell you why I'm being specific about that in a minute. It's risky if you tolerate that because you're assuming that they have the capacity and the life experience and the perspective and the ability to regulate that and have that be responsible and not interfere with stuff. And that is a very risky proposition given cognitive and social developmental issues for teenagers. Now, I'm also not talking about any other substance. And so alcohol and marijuana, because of their psychoactive effects, don't have the same risks for devastating your life as all prescription medication that's abused and all illicit drugs, cocaine, crack, heroin, methamphetamine, Molly, all of that kind of stuff. There are serious effects. There's serious impacts on the body, and they're seriously addictive, and mean that kids who become addicted to them can be addicted to them very quickly, the second, the third time. So
are you seeing that in high schools? But are you seeing those other drugs?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Well, sure. But part because my practice is teenagers who are in trouble. But regardless of whether me or other people see them, it's a risky thing to say, are you talking about something you've seen? I'm talking about the things that we know from research and from the information that's gathered about teenagers and what they're doing and what happens if they do certain things. And but the majority, all of the illicit drugs and the prescription drugs that are abused, the percentages of kids who use those are very small. They're still low. When they come into play, they can be catastrophic, but luckily they're small. Alcohol and marijuana use is not small. You're talking about by high school age, 60% of kids have drank in the last year, and somewhere between 30 and 40% of kids have smoked weed in the last year. And so that's a large percentage of kids by a senior year. That doesn't mean they're using regularly. It means that they've within the last year have they done that. And so that's just a thing. That's part of the parenting thing. So one thing is, yes, you should set limits on your kids about this stuff because you can't rely on your kid being able to do that in a way that you can trust they're going to do it well.
They don't have that prefrontal cortex yet, so how can they? They don't have that logical part of their brain that says, hey, I think I've had too much.
Well, it's actually, Michelle, there's an interesting and evolving awareness about what's going on. And it's certainly the case that the inhibitory centers of the brain still develop up until early 20s. So that's what you mean by when you're saying, you and I know when you're talking prefrontal cortex, you're talking about the natural ability of the brain to inhibit certain kind of impulsive behaviors. And so that keeps developing, which means they're not as developed as adults. But the interesting thing about the way teens think is that they actually are very logical. And when you ask them logical questions, they can provide reasoning that is almost comparable to adults. It's how they prioritize it that's different. And so normatively, teens don't really pay as much attention to negative consequences. They pay much more attention to positive possibilities. And so they can tell you that this is a risk that something could go bad, but in their brains put more emphasis on, hey, this could be fun, rather than, hey, this could get me in trouble. So they can report it, but how they actually make decisions means that they emphasize more, hey, this will be cool, and off they go. And you're grabbing them by the collar and yanking them back and all of that kind of stuff.
So the punishment would be the same if you find out your kid's been drinking or drinking, vaping, smoking pot kind of thing, same kind of punishment?
No, I wouldn't say that, because the implications for vaping are very significantly different. The addiction, even if it's to nicotine, has a different life effect than the regular use of marijuana and the effects of THC, and the regular use of alcohol and the effects of alcohol on both your immediate decision-making while you're under the influence, but also about the effects on important areas. So those are more serious kinds of things to me than smoking cigarettes or vaping, even though vaping and cigarettes, I think it's important to address, but mostly because of the health aspects of it, rather than the potential kind of life-affecting aspects of it. Alcohol and marijuana have much more life-affecting aspects of it.
So if we found out that our kids were doing that, what is an appropriate punishment in high school?
Well, but I will say that in my book, Raising Teens in the 21st Century, there's a set of chapters. The book is written so that you can literally flip to something, and there's like 3 or 4 pages of concentrated descriptions about what's going on and suggestions about what to do. So it's made to be a quick reference, not a read-through, because there's like 79 chapters in it of all kinds of different things. But so there's details about this in there. And there's, of course, plenty of stuff everywhere about how to deal with your kids when you find them using. But I'm assuming by your question that this is, you've discovered your kid using, and so we're going to treat it as it's experimental. And let me be clear, I mean alcohol and marijuana. If you discover your kid is using Xanax or shooting up heroin, you go all the way to the nuclear option. You yank everybody in, hold this kid close to you until you can get to some people who know what they're doing to figure out what's going on and how to be more serious and intensive about dealing with that. But with the typical alcohol and marijuana, there's an initial kind of you discover that they're using, which means they've been experimenting with it. And basically, you pull them back in. And so there's a period of time, and I tend to recommend it be about 2 weeks, that you pull in and shut down everything. Social media, visiting, visitors, nothing. That you pull them back into the middle of the family. And that there's then a discussion about if you haven't done it already, if it is, then it's a review about your expectations about alcohol and marijuana use and other drugs, just to add that in. And so you have all of the kind of discussions with them about things. But the real important thing that's beautiful these days, because technology has provided it, are drug screens and the alcohol breathalyzer tests. Because drug screens, when you buy them in bulk, you can get for $7 a instant urine drug screen for 10 different substances. You can pay $20 or so at the corner grocery store for just a marijuana one. But if you found your kid is using, my automatic recommendation is for the next 12 months in a decreasing level of frequency, you're going to be drug testing your kid. Because you're going to make the point, I'm not forgetting about this, but not by lecturing them and not by saying it, by regularly having drug screens with a decrease in frequency because they're so affordable. And you can get a breathalyzer that you can attach to your smartphone. And so that because the alcohol doesn't show up, the metabolites don't show up in urine drug screens, and so you can't really test the alcohol from that. But you can get for $90, you can get a breathalyzer attached to your smartphone and test your kid for alcohol too. So you can set the testing up, and then once you've got the way that I tend to recommend it, especially for marijuana, is there have to be 2 weeks of clean drug screens. And then you start walking them back out into the world, because this is not a sign that they're an addict and that some kind of horrible addiction is going on. But if you then start drug testing, and if you follow some of the basic framework of suggestions that I make, and then your kid uses again, now you've got a way to diagnostically know something's wrong. If they know they're getting tested, if they know you're continuing to pay attention to this, and they still try and get away with it, that's when it moves to the next level. And that's where then you involve a mental health professional, you consult, you figure out what to do about addressing things more directly and what may in a more complicated way may be going on with your kid.
I love that. That was great information. What do you say to your kid if they come up to you and say, did you and Dad drink in high school? Did you guys use drugs? What was that like for you guys?
I'll answer it, but I want to preface it by saying, got a chapter in the book about when to talk about things and when not, and so there's some criteria for that. The primary criteria is, the most basic criteria is, do you think it would be useful for your kid to know? This is not a sharing of war stories where it's, hey, ha, 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 when I was a teenager. That's for you and your buddies and other people. But when you're talking to your kid, the question always is about serious things. What's going to be important and useful, and could it be helpful to them? And so talking about that and talking about the potential trouble, there's some value to that. Talking about Uncle Joe or our great Aunt Martha, who had addiction problems, is especially important. Talking about your own history and about how it devastated your life or it caused problems enough for you to have to do. Those kinds of things have some value. But again, framing it so that you're thinking, what's the information that I want them to get? And that's the part you include. So you might not include all of the details of it. And you might not, there are pieces that you don't tell them until they're adults because it could be very personal or it could be really difficult information to process depending on your own history. And so that from that perspective, that's usually the beginning thing. Now, some of it can also be, yeah, I snuck out too, and my parents nailed my butt to the wall. And so here we are, continuing tradition, because I'm going to nail your butt to the wall if you keep messing with me about this. So you can both acknowledge, and I think it's important to acknowledge, it's a regular teenage thing on the one hand, but on the other hand, the fact that it's a regular teenage thing doesn't mean it's okay or that it's acceptable. Just because it's normative does not make it desirable or right.
And, a lot of parents talk about how they feel torn because they kind of want their kids to mess up a little bit before they leave for college. Because I personally know of kids that have gone to college that were very straight-laced in high school, went to college, and then fell off the deep end and wound up almost killing themselves from drinking way too much. They were in the hospital. So it's like, I feel that way a little bit. I'm like, gosh, and I've talked to other people, like, I want him to experiment, but I don't. I don't want him to. So it's like, oh, what do we do? What do we do?
Well, there's a larger issue about that alcohol and drug comes into, which is if your kid is planning to, and there's the goal for them to end up heading off to college and living on a college campus, then senior year has some particular kinds of challenges that it's important, I think, and make the recommendation that you start finding ways to give them more room to be more in charge of the things they decide. And the ultimate goal is for the teenager to actually assume self-accountability. Being an adult is holding yourself accountable for things. Being a kid is having other people hold you accountable. And so during the senior year, especially, there's value in you starting to both have your kid be able to make more decisions for themselves, but you're going to hold them accountable for those choices and those decisions. And there's a process for doing that. And yet again, I've got some things to say about this. In this instance, I wrote a series of blogs for parents of seniors that's on my drjameswellborn.com site. You can search for that down in the Stranger in My House blog section. And there's a series of 4 different blogs about different categories that are important to think about how to give your kid more room. And along those same lines that you're talking about, have them have the opportunity to screw up so that you can yank them back while they're still in the house, get them reoriented, and then have them try it again. Because they need to, exactly as you said, I've had the same experience with the teams that I run across, where the parents have used a punitive kind of monitoring, structuring model for their kids to keep them from being able to have to be exposed to that. And then the kids really can fly way off the end of the dock, so to speak, because they haven't had experience and they have to learn the hard way. Now, many of them still learn, but it's a hard lesson when they're drinking or smoking weed so much in college and they haven't before, and their grades drop and they fail the first semester and blah, 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 all of the stuff that comes with that. So starting to anticipate that across senior year, and especially as the summer approaches, especially for a kid who's going to be leaving the home. The other things include managing finances. Other things include managing other areas of their lives, money and all that kind of stuff. So there are categories of things that alcohol and drugs is just one of them.
So great, and a perfect segue, since you just plugged yourself. That was my next question. Where would you like to send people to learn more? And it sounds like Dr. James, you said, it's a new website from the last time we talked, right? Dr. James G. Wellborn?
Yeah, I had a note. Well, this one, the kind of entry website now is drjameswellborn.com, drjameswellborn.com. Mm-hmm. My original website I just constructed for my clients. And so the original website, which is under the private practice tab in Dr. James Wellborn's site, has all of the information about all kinds of stuff. There's a whole section on parents and all kinds of stuff for websites and books and all kinds of resources for parents on every category, including kind of more clinical stuff, depression, anxiety, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And there's a similar website for teenagers that they can go to that's got information for them in the same sort of way. The Dr. James Wellborn site, where you start, and is a good entry place, has all of the blogs that I've written since the chapters in the book. And so there's a lot of information. But currently, I'm doing a series on the 13 Reasons Why movie and book. One of the things that we ran into is that when people would write about it, they'd say, oh my God, parents need to talk to their kids. And then this article would stop. You need to talk to your kids. And the question is, about what and how?
Right.
I just took each episode and said, here's major themes of this episode, and here's ways to address that. And so that's unfolding right now on my blog site. And also a column that I write for a local Brentwood homepage is a local online news source. And so that's an example. I've got a Twitter account that's got quotes and references to things and that kind of business. I've got a Facebook page. I've got all the social media stuff. But really, it's the website is where you go and you can kind of navigate through the different levels of resource of things that I try and provide for the folks that I work with and anybody who's raising teens.
Well, it is fantastic, and you are a fantastic resource and a generous expert to share with us and our audience today. Thank you so much, James.
I'm happy to be able to. Thank you so much for having me.
Great conversation, and thank you to everybody who has downloaded and listened to this show. We sure appreciate your time and attention. Don't forget, head over to michellechalfant.com and register for the intensive next weekend. As we are recording this, we look forward to seeing you there at the Scarlett Bennett Center next Friday. That's it. On behalf of Michelle Chalfant and our fantastic guest, Dr. James Wellborn, we'll see you next week right here in the Adult Chair.